welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Mr. Don Jeffries is back on the show. Don, it's a pleasure to be able to see you. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening who has not heard you before?
It's always a pleasure, Robbie. It's my name, Don Jeffries. I've been around. I think I have seniority in almost all of them now. And then the Robert Groden and Gary Mack, I think, are the only two I can think of that are still alive that have been doing this longer than I have. I started out as a teenager in the mid '70s working for Mark Lane Citizens Committee of Inquiry. So I've been down these rabbit holes for a long time, and it's once it gets hold of you, it's hard to let go.
And you've entertained my rabbit holes many times on many different episodes of shows, but this one is going to be no different. I'm going to ask you kind of more about LBJ and kind of like the relationship that he kind of had as a figure in the political sphere, and also as a relationship between the RFK and maybe JFK, because we're both Kennedy assassination researchers. I give you more of that title because I just like looking at the case and talking about it because it is interesting. But I think, through the researching of documents, videos, interviews, all these things, you come across a whole swath of evidence. And obviously there's prevailing myths and theories and ideas on certain figures in the case. And I wanted to get your understanding of LBJ, what he means to you, what he meant to the political sphere of the times, and what he meant to RFK and JFK.
Yeah, well, I think, again, probably when I first started, being interested in the JFK assassination, I was a teenager. It was, after the assassination, a while after it, but it took me a while to get interested. I realized these books were out there, but I actually read Johnny We Hardly Knew Ye, which isn't a conspiracy book, but it was written by Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers, who were the two most famous members of Kennedy's Irish Mafia. They were as close as aides and been with him for a long time. And I was a Kennedy fanboy already. I read all the Kennedy books. I just was fascinated by him. And they painted a really bad picture of LBJ. And they weren't really talking about conspiracy, but he looked really, really bad in terms of the way he acted that day. And you can see the same thing in Death of a President. William Manchester, again, not a pro-conspiracy book, but really made LBJ look bad. His behavior was bizarre, to say the least. And so my first thought, I mean, I always thought it was a conspiracy. I just didn't really think about it that much until then. Uh, I think LBJ was a lot of people's first suspect. I came from a Catholic family, and they all hated LBJ. And so after Kennedy was killed, I never heard anybody say anything other than that it was a conspiracy. My father and all the relatives were saying LBJ did it, and so that was what my history was. And of course, later I got a little more sophisticated and understood that, those kind of things. It probably was planned and happened above his level. But I think he had, I don't think he could have gotten the media to still cover up 60 plus years later. So I think the decision was made. It was a much more powerful group than that. But I think he had pre-knowledge. I think, and if somebody told him, hey, we're going to kill Kennedy, does anybody think he would have objected? I mean, and Richard Nixon later made that comment. He goes, I wanted to be president really bad too. I just wasn't willing to kill for it. LBJ was very, very, very ambitious, and he wanted to be president. Sam Rayburn very famously, when after he was sworn in as vice president, he told him it should be the other way around. And that's what all the Southern Democrats felt that way. They didn't like Kennedy. So LBJ would have certainly, I think, would have approved that. He wasn't going to argue and say, you can't do that. I'm going to blow the whistle on you. So he was happy to do that. He was going to be president. And if you look at his behavior that day, again, he acted guilty the entire time. And really, I think other than Jack Ruby shooting Oswald 2 days later, the reason why so many people really right off the bat believed there was a conspiracy was because of his behavior. If you look at, the pictures from Air Force One where he hit, Lady Bird Johnson can't keep the smile off her face, very inappropriate. Making Jackie Kennedy stand next to him, which was totally unnecessary. And in fact, taking oath of office on Air Force One was unnecessary because he became president automatically. And the famous LBJ.
The oath was brought by RFK. It was the one that told him he needed to be sworn in. That's why they had Sarah Judge Hughes go down there. This is kind of what I wanted to get into, because I know it's like conflicting, and I'm sure we're going to have different opinions on it, but like listening to all the Air Force One interviews, like people like Malcolm Kilduff and others that were involved on the Air Force One, they've all stated that it was RFK's decision to do that. Like Malcolm Kilduff was the one that wanted to grab a microphone. The wink, again, I don't know how people act.
Albert Thomas, yeah, Albert
Yeah,
Thomas.
I don't know how people act with trauma. Again, I do think it's like bad to have like late Jackie stand there. But at the same time, isn't Johnson the one that stated he wasn't leaving Dallas without Jackie and Jackie wasn't going to leave without JFK's body? And that's the whole reason why the Secret Service were supposed to be brandishing guns and doing whatever to get the body out of Dallas. If you want to say it's for a different autopsy, it's more controlled. Jackie did pick a naval hospital for where she wanted the autopsy to be done at, too.
Right. Right. No, there's no doubt. But the again, and that Malcolm Kilduff saying that, again, afterwards, some people went with a certain story, but I've read tons of books and anecdotal evidence that RFK was incensed about it because he told LBJ told people that RFK told him not to leave until he took the oath of office, and in private, RFK said, "I told him I never said anything saying." And that from that day forward, he really despised Johnson because he knew he lied that day. And from that day, and all the way until RFK was killed, where for American Memory Hole, my last book, we found some evidence that I was shocked to find that LBJ was up pacing the floor of the White House that night where Kennedy lay, near death after being shot. And he kept calling people saying, "Is he dead yet? Is he dead yet?" He wasn't sleeping. That's how anxious he was. So there was a huge hatred between them. But yeah, I mean, that was a personal thing. LBJ didn't have the power to do something like that by himself, obviously. So I think these decisions were made above them. I mean, the people in the Pentagon, the CIA, went all over the place that wanted Kennedy killed. But my point is that LBJ was a beneficiary, and he certainly wouldn't have balked at being a beneficiary. And I think a lot of the critics were drawn into it. You still have people that I think I believe Penn Jones always believed LBJ did it. There's a lot of people that believe he wasn't just Roger Stone later. I don't believe that, but that drew a lot of their attention. That I think that's why a lot of people believe there was a conspiracy was because of his behavior, and maybe some of that was because he was awkward. And I mean, if you watch his speech when he got off of when he arrived at Andrews Air Force Base that night, it's hard to watch. I have suffered a great personal loss. I mean, it's so awkward and it seems so unconvincing. Now, maybe that's just because Kennedy was so eloquent and LBJ, just sounded like a corn pone, guy. But I think later you had the play McBird, which was very famously on Broadway, which is, it was a very thinly veiled LBJ. And it was like Macbeth, but an LBJ. And the obvious inference there was that, LBJ had JFK killed. So a lot of people believe that. And you still have that. I know Jim DiEugenio and others argue against it, and I do too. But I just think that to say I don't think this would have happened without LBJ. I think they had to know that LBJ wouldn't, have conducted a real investigation and found out what really happened.
Well, I think a lot of people benefited from it. And the people in positions that could have done a proper investigation just didn't care that much about Kennedy to want to do that. Again, Johnson, if he really wanted to be president, I don't think assassinating the former one would have been it. Grand plan for it, because even though he got the position, he spent the next couple of years dealing with comparisons of Kennedy to Johnson and dealing with press issues when it comes to Johnson's administration compared to Kennedy's. He was basically living in Kennedy's shadow, much like RFK was for a long time, which why he resented that, and possibly why he might have broke out and been more vocal and more on the attack and known as the little shit on the Hill, because RFK wanted to make a name for himself, and he did, dealing with organized crime. I do believe that took a toll on him as well, too, the JFK assassination. I do believe he was going to reopen the investigation into his brother's death. But we'll get to that a little bit later on. Dealing with the JFK-LBJ relationship. Like you said, you don't believe he was behind it. You believe that he might have had pre-knowledge. I don't know about pre-knowledge. I definitely think with the cover-up in the Warren Commission, that was established to investigate the president's death, but it wasn't LBJ's creation. It was given by Joseph Alsop and others that were calling him on like the 25th and other days before the Warren Commission was established, saying this is something you need to do for the public. And again, Johnson did a lot of stuff, kept through with Kennedy's policies, and kept Kennedy people on staff, even though some of them ended up leaving later. And that's actually one of his biggest regrets, was doing that, because he believed that if he would have had his own people in there, his administration would have dealt with certain situations differently. But did he ever make a public statement, do you know of, or was dismissing JFK at all? Because, like, again, we're getting into the part of JFK and
No,
LBJ.
not
I was just
publicly, no.
wondering.
Oh no, I mean, I think he would have known that would have been a horrible political move. So he in private, he see it that the rift was mostly between RFK and him. JFK was such a nice guy that he was diplomatic and got along with everybody. I don't think he liked LBJ either. Jackie Kennedy didn't like him, but RFK is the one that hated him. So LBJ, JFK was, diplomatic enough to get along okay with him and make jokes about it and everything. But I think that Johnson seethed behind the scenes, and he certainly continued. He continued JFK's policies on the surface, but the most important ones that probably got him killed, he certainly did, and that would be certainly our Vietnam policy. It would be Kennedy's really half plan to to abolish the CIA. I mean, he was openly talking about, we need to get rid of this agency. Obviously, that never happened. So I think that you look at those two things alone, it's a huge difference. I mean, JFK was going to withdraw from Vietnam. He already started the policy. And LBJ, as soon as he got in office, people always ask me about a conspirator. Um, you certainly can look at McGeorge Bundy, who was his national security advisor, because he drafted National Security Action Memorandum 273, which totally contradicted 263, which is the one Oliver Stone based a lot of JFK on, which was the withdrawal policy from Vietnam. The first 1,000 out by the end of 63, all Americans out by 1965. And you had McGeorge Bundy drafting this new memorandum on the day of the assassination. Now, he had to know JFK would have never signed it and would have fired him on the spot for writing it. But see, that's why I think you want somebody with foreknowledge, McGeorge Bundy, definitely, because he knew that JFK would never see it. LBJ couldn't sign it fast enough. So I think those are the two things. Yeah, the civil rights movement, but even something like the civil rights movement, it had a different feel because everybody knew Johnson in private was a bigot, and he just was doing this for political reasons. And he's made many famous comments of that. So I really think the civil rights movement would have gone much smoother under Kennedy, simply because of the look. And so that continued, but that was it. That's really the only policy of Kennedy's that continued, and everything else. And LBJ got a lot of mileage out of that. See, we started the civil rights. We continued that, but his Vietnam policy was all important. Most of us think that was the main reason he was killed. At least I do.
Again, the pulling out aspect of Vietnam was like through maybe private conversations and on paper that might not have been released at the time, but based on what his actions were doing publicly, was increasing troop movement. Again, I believe he would have pulled out of Vietnam, but Johnson's whole thing was keeping up with Kennedy's stuff in the beginning, and he states that, and multiple people in his administration state that in his beginning. So he decided to put more troops in based on like George Reedy's words and others. I'm curious, like, we talk about the relationship between JFK and LBJ. Why would LBJ, when Kennedy's killed, call Rose Kennedy? Why would he call Ted Kennedy? Why would he, ask a lot of guidance of RFK in the beginning, and then seems to be a falling out, which we'll get to. But I don't know, like, for me, it just seemed like you mentioned with the contentious relationship between RFK and LBJ, but, JFK was a nice guy. A lot of people use like JFK just handing out the vice president spot to LBJ as like a goof, thinking he wouldn't accept it or something, and then was shocked when
That's
he
what some
accepted
people
it.
say.
But
Yeah, some
it
people
was to
say.
pull the South in, because he was losing the South votes. And sadly, I believe that, in my opinion, I think it would have been an ultimate presidency if he would have utilized Johnson as his VP. He would have got civil rights passed. I think it was Johnson on a phone call complains that Kennedy had a bill sitting in there for a year and a half, and many others complained that Kennedy didn't understand how to work with these people. He wasn't part of the club. I do believe that the politics works like a fraternity. It works like this club mentality. You have to be in, someone has to get something back from what they're doing for you. And I don't think Kennedy was playing that. I think when he was talking about tearing apart everything was because he realized this system was a bunch of people just like greasing each other's palms to get things across. I mean, Johnson had many connections with loyal people. We know that. But it's, like campaign contributions. He states in a phone call, Kennedy had these campaign contributions. Johnson had these campaign contributions. Goldwater has these campaign. Everyone's doing it. It's the game. And I think that's where we kind of like, I'm trying to find like a more realistic sense because you somehow we built up these figures as heroes and villains and like they're like the ultimates. And I'm like, I don't know, like for Johnson, there's too many long stretches where I'm like, I haven't seen that, and I've actually seen the opposite based on like multiple other interviews. And again, it's interviews, but even RFK publicly, like he was recorded as being actually kind of closer to Hoover than we all like to think about, like this vendetta blackmail type thing. And RFK has explained the relationship multiple times. He did actually increase wiretapping and learned that from J. Edgar Hoover. So it's again, it's confusing when you're trying to look at the record and trying to piece together something that's not like a, like a myth or a story. Like I don't believe in the Camelot theory, but again, I'm separating myself from like the Kennedy aspect.
Yeah, well, you have to look at their I mean, and I mean, Jackie set the Camelot thing into motion, and that was all mythology. And he was murdered, like Lincoln, and especially there was a martyrdom that he was built up, and certainly Kennedy became a martyr. But I think that you're right. There's a huge difference between Kennedy was never really comfortable in the Senate. He was a little more comfortable than his RFK. RFK was not comfortable at all. He was just up there fighting. He had no sense of playing the game. LBJ was a consummate insider. He had been in the Senate a long time. He was FDR's handpicked. I mean, he used to go eat breakfast in the White House with FDR. He was FDR's boy, and so he knew how to he knew how to strong arm people. And so yeah, he could if Kennedy had used him more. But I get the sense that Kennedy hated that style and he didn't want to play that. And I guess I can't really speculate, but I think that's the only reason. And I do think there's something to the fact that they didn't think OBJ was going to take it. And so he kind of was stuck with him. He may have gotten stuck with somebody that helped him win the election because he probably won the southern states because of that. But so I think it was always an uneasy relationship, and he was always trying to find something for Johnson to do. I think he put him, had a lot to do with the space program, maybe, or something. But um, I just think that again, I admit I'm prejudiced. I mean, I'm no fan of Johnson, and again, a lot of that again came from my family. My family hated Johnson, and the main reason is because they thought I killed Kennedy. And so I was steeped in that as a little kid, 7 years old. So and nothing he said changed that, when it's like because he was so very awkward in speaking. Maybe that's superficial of me to think that. And of course, RFK became my hero as a kid. Once JFK was killed, and he was, obviously at odds with LBJ and was his main competitor. So, but yeah, there's no doubt that too much because if you look at, when I first started investigating this, not many people took the big theory that I have now. Again, I think there are tons of people now. With the redacted files recently, a lot of people are throwing Israel in there because, JFK, we didn't learn for a long time that JFK was in a war of words with David Ben-Gurion about Israel developing nuclear weapons in 1963. So what involvement, I don't know, but there's a lot of people that he was at odds with, and certainly everybody in the CIA, most of the Pentagon, General Curtis LeMay, I think we can rest assured he was probably a conspirator. So there were very powerful people, I think, that wanted him dead. So I don't think Johnson could have done something like that. Again, originally, a lot of the theories were Johnson and the Texas oil man and E. Howard Hunt and all. I've never bought that. I don't think because I don't think the media, especially a lot of the standard, mainstream liberal media, I don't think they would have possibly covered up, especially 60 years later. It has to be something higher than that, where you still get people. We saw, was it last year we had the ABC documentary, which is horrible. The same kind of nonsense, trotting out the same things that they've done for 60 plus years. And they have to know how ridiculous it sounds. They can't, they got, what's that guy's name? Todd Vaughn, who I used to argue with on the forums years ago. They got him out to trot his computer theory, the same stuff they did when Peter Jennings had his special in 2003. This is what they do. There's no argument for it. So, and they don't let people like me or anybody like that on. They did have Jim DiEugenio and Oliver Stone and what's Jefferson Morley, but they gave them like 5 minutes combined, if that. It probably wasn't even that. So they didn't really let them participate. So I think this is a huge conspiracy, and anything tempted. So that's why I'm never going to be buying into the LBJ did it here because that minimizes things too much. But I do think LBJ, I think they would have had to gotten his approval. I think. Now, you noted about him calling Rose Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy, especially if you listen to the Jackie Kennedy call, it's really hard to listen to
Well, I mean, how do you
because
explain like the Jackie not liking him if LBJ called her all the time,
right, yeah, and
and then there was like
she's
flirting on the phone as well
yes,
too?
there was flirting. It was a totally inappropriate phone call on both ends. But I think, Jackie was kind of messed up too. I think that's what her personality was. But in private, I mean, that's what everybody said. I talked to JFK Jr.'s girlfriend from high school when I was investigating JFK Jr.'s death for Hidden History. And, she was very adamant about, Jackie used to badmouth LBJ at dinner and everything. And she talked about how, she hated him. So yeah, that
What year?
conversation doesn't sound like that. Oh, this would have been 70s probably. Yeah, mid to late
I'm
70s,
wondering if it's
something like that.
influenced from the Manchester book because it seems like a lot of things that I start seeing bad, like when it really sparks up with LBJ
Yes,
being,
yes.
it all
Yeah,
follows after the Manchester book, and we don't know if that's true on any of it. And Jackie already denied some of those claims about LBJ, but Bobby and Teddy, oh no, Teddy and Jackie tried to stop the book. Bobby's the one that was trying to pay the 600,000 and all that to not have it rewritten because they were saying that he's going to be sued and if it's not rewritten. And Manchester was offended by having his book rewritten for all the stuff he put into it. We won't know if any of the interviews in there are real until 2075 when the tapes come out, apparently. But again, I think a lot of that had stuff like even with Seth Cancer. We see Seth Cantor talking about Ruby at Parkland Hospital. I know Ruby, all this type of stuff. He also brought up a lot of things about LBJ that gets part of the myth about LBJ with certain oil individuals and other things that there's not really evidence for. Now, there is evidence for oil connections. That I'm not denying at all. And he even admits everybody's taken contributions from somebody. But there were certain things that were mentioned where I'm like, I haven't found any evidence for this. And it only comes from Seth Cantor. So again, he's a Texan. He's in that area. Maybe he knows from the ground level. But if it's just coming from one source, I kind of have to start questioning his validity of his testimony. For instance, let me give you an example. Richard Russell. Everyone uses Richard Russell as a member of the Warren Commission that was forced onto it by LBJ, where he says, I don't want to have to stick the FBI on you, but you're goddamn going to serve. Well, he's also the one talking about doing coups in Vietnam every other week. And you think that's a great way to get this thing, settled. And how if you haven't served in a war, but you were in the same high school class as someone who served in 2 wars, it's your public duty to go serve in that war. You're letting your country down. Well, I don't agree with that guy as a person, so I don't want to use him as an example for the evidence of the Warren Commission being a false. So again,
No, that was
conflicting.
Weisberg. Weisberg got a, I loved Harold Weisberg in many ways, but I got to meet him and had dinner at his house so when I was young, and he was as ornery as everybody claimed. He was a hero of mine, but he was messed up in many ways, and he formed a relationship with Russell, and I think it satisfies his ego because Russell was a powerful senator, and he I think all of us looked at Russell as he was because the Warren Commission members did very little work. The councils did almost everything. The Warren Commission members attended few sessions of testimony. They did no investigating at all. They depended on the council, like Arlen Specter. Those are the people that did the work.
Well, the
So
main
that's where
person, Alan Dulles, only did 16% of the interviews, and that's
right,
the most
yeah,
out of any main Warren Commission
yeah.
member.
Dulles was the main. So people say he was the architect, but he was only there for 16% of the time. I don't agree with that either. But so Russell was very limited in his knowledge as well. And as you admit, he was nobody that I would have liked politically on any other issue. But him and Hale Boggs is the same way. Hale Boggs, I wouldn't have been a fan of Hale Boggs, but he and Hale Boggs and supposedly John Sherman Cooper as well, all three had doubts about the single bullet theory at least. Russell had the most of them. So Weisberg latched onto him uh, because he was a big name to try to say, so look, even he had doubts, and he was the only one talking about it. Yeah, I don't think anybody was thinking this guy knows what's going on. It's just hey, somebody in the Warren Commission doubted it, so we were all searching for something. Hey, even and of course Hale Boggs disappearing on a plane after being driven to the airport by a young Bill Clinton. By the way, I always like to bring that up.
That's what I literally just was talking about that, and I could not remember who the hell it was. And then thank you for saying that. That's funny.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, now, as I've been reminded, technically that's not exactly, and that's how they get you on technicalities. Technically, Bill Clinton didn't drive him for his fatal plane crash. What happened is he drove him to the airport because he took a plane to somewhere and then transferred. So technically, but Bill Clinton did drive him to the
That's
airport
still,
that final
I mean,
time.
it's still
So
cool.
it's still pretty amazing, yeah, because Bill Clinton was very, very young, and you know how many other body count things he was associated with. It's kind of interesting. But so you know, Hellbog's disappearing like that and being the other member of the commission that had a lot of doubts, you know, that gave us positive. But you know, we knew any of these people. I mean, people would quote John Connolly, you know, for the single bullet theory, even though Connolly supported publicly. Now, in private, Gerald Celente, who I know, Gerald Celente is talking in private about how years later, uh, Connolly would talk very openly to him about it was a conspiracy and they killed him and everything. But these guys were gutless. Why wouldn't he say that publicly? They just wouldn't.
Well, why didn't
RFK, you
RFK
can,
state anything
yeah,
about the Warren
you can say
Commission?
RFK. RFK in private knew there was a conspiracy. He was telling his aides to read the books. And but publicly, you know, even shortly before his death, he was saying he trusted the Warren Report. Now we have to believe that, you know, David Talbot's brothers and all these other books that in private he knew that it wasn't. He was waiting to become president to reopen the investigation, as you said, which I think he would have done. But you know, when I look at these things, it's very few of these people I'm thinking, okay, I agree with them necessarily and everything. But when you talked about Seth Cantor was kind of, again, he was part of the prejudice of the times, and not prejudice, but one of the original theories was that Texas oil man, and you know, there was the meeting at the Hunt home, you know, they've
Well, the
talked about with
Murchison.
LBJ's mistress, yeah, Murchison,
I
yeah,
don't believe that one though. That's the thing is that
yeah,
that
I
one's
don't, yeah, it's all based on Madeline Brown pretty much, and you know, was she credible? You know, I don't know, but that was one of the original suspects was that group. I mean, when I first started reading about it, the big thing was the oil depletion allowance, which Kennedy wanted to get rid of, which was big to oil companies. Again, I just don't think now. I didn't know at the time. I was just a young liberal, radical, card carrying member of the ACLU. You know, I didn't realize, you know, these oil companies don't. I mean, they certainly are powerful and they make tons of profits, but they don't run public policy. They just don't have that kind of. They get better press if they did.
well,
So I
explain a little bit about the relationship with JFK and LBJ. Like, would you call someone's mother if you know, didn't care about the guy or do anything like that? A lot of people
well,
bring this like an insult to like her like rubbing it in her face, but you know, he's sincere on the phone. I'll play a clip later on about him, his sincere comment about Kennedy in general. But there's a lot more evidence to support that like JFK and LBJ had an okay relationship. It was just two separate personalities. And again, Johnson's a Texan. You know, his personality is not going to match JFK's. RFK hated being teased, and JFK would tease him, and RFK would get upset with it. But LBJ would do his Southern humor, and RFK found it offensive and would get offended by it. The relationship just was not, they weren't meant to be friends. They weren't even meant to be in proximity of each other. But, you know, we're going to get into that aspect of it, but I want to, the LBJ carrying on policies and doing things, whether it's for vanity or whether it's for votes, you know, JFK wasn't really going to jump on anything ahead of time until re-elections were done. Everything was about re-elections, just like with every politician, it's all about re-elections.
sure, and I think again that um, when you talk about the phone call to Rose Kennedy, everything, I mean that would be to me. You say it's I doesn't sound sincere to me, but again, I'm prejudiced. Johnson, nothing he's ever said sounded sincere to me. I just think he just has a really insincere tone to his voice. I don't know. That's just the way it comes off to me. But to me, that was a quintessential political move. Where I don't think necessarily some people think he did it just to rub Rose Kennedy's face in it. I don't think, but I mean, Rose Kennedy sounds, you know, I guess she was so used to loss already. She already lost two kids before that. But so she sounds, you know, upbeat and, you know, she was very religious. So she always, you know, her faith carried her through that. But the Jackie Kennedy one is more troubling because it does sound like he's flirting with her and she's kind of flirting back and sounding, you know, frankly, the whole thing is it's disturbing to listen to. It really is. But I think, again, LBJ was covering all the bases. And I think he knew he couldn't get a phone call like that out of RFK. RFK wouldn't have done it. RFK could not, he couldn't, that's why he couldn't
Well, he
do
talked to
anything
Bobby
like,
personally. RFK wouldn't call
yeah,
Jackie though.
no. But he, when he and RFK could not hide the hostility. And that was, and that was his problem as a politician. very zealous, and he couldn't play the game. Johnson was a consummate master of the game. So they clashed over that. You mentioned they already hated each other in the White House. RFK famously did, and then JFK was like kind of coming between them or trying to, smooth it over. But that day, with the Air Force One call and a lot of the other behavior, because the people who didn't go with them, Dave Powers, people like that, talked about how he gave every one of the Kennedy people, he told them all, I need you more now than he needed you, or something like that. He gave them the exact same pitch. It was a sales pitch, almost like it had been rehearsed. And he convinced some of them. He got Larry O'Brien on board, and I think McGeorge Buddy, something who I think was a conspirator.
Ted Sorensen, Ken O'Donnell.
Yeah. So Ken O'Donnell went briefly, and Ken O'Donnell kind of admits in the book that he shouldn't have, and Dave Powers didn't go. And so I think they were just world apart, but he was the logical suspect, to me. And again, I don't think, knowing what I learned about the assassination, I think it was way beyond that. And I think there were much more powerful people involved, and Johnson was just a politician. But I think they told him beforehand. I mean, it's not impossible. Like a lot of people that think he didn't have involvement. They said, look his phone call to Hoover, where he said, basically Hoover was his neighbor across the street. I think it was All Fletcher Prouty basically said he didn't have involvement because he said he called Hoover, and if you listen to that call, it's very interesting where he says like, they weren't shooting at me, were they? Laughing, but it's kind of he's being serious too. Like he's asking Hoover because he assumes Hoover knows. Because I think we can assume Hoover had pre-knowledge as well.
Well, he wasn't laughing. He asked him how many shots were fired. He said 3 shots. He goes, were any of them fired at me? That's a self-preservation thing.
Yeah. I bet it was. I think he wanted
He's
to come off
selfish
as
for
like,
sure.
yeah, but was that to make it look like he didn't know? Who knows? I don't know. But I just do know that Johnson was. And again, I admit I have prejudice against him. It's hard for me to look. I mean, he was just a despicable guy in real life too. I mean, every anecdote he was just a really ugly guy. I mean, he just did terrible. He treated everybody. I mean, if you look, you can't find a bad anecdote about JFK, for instance. You won't find anybody that's saying JFK didn't treat them well and wasn't a nice, polite guy. Say opposite with LBJ. You can't find a personal anecdote that says he was nice, that he treated anybody nice. He was horrible to everybody.
I can find many personal anecdotes of LBJ treating people nice. He treated his friends greatly.
Well, you may be people that benefited from it, but I mean, you listen to George Reedy
He
and his
treated
press
RFK
secretary.
greatly too. The issue is when does RFK decide that he starts to really not like Johnson? When his brother was assassinated, what I can start to see is when he really veers off is when he wasn't selected for VP because he felt like he was owed that position. There's plenty of conversations where they're talking on the phone and RFK goes, do you mind ordering protection for, Martin Luther King because he's visiting this trip and it's a very bad area and we hope. And then LBJ's like, I can do that. Yep, I'll get Hoover right on it immediately. And it's within the next phone call, less than like 10 minutes later, he's calling Hoover, telling Hoover he needs to do this. Hoover doesn't care if it's MLK, doesn't care about his job. The president just ordered him to do something. He's a Boy Scout. He's doing it. So it's like, again, I mean, maybe I could play something for you and just see if I can get your opinion and maybe change something about, some of the stuff. And this is what I just mentioned. I actually just discovered this today. And I've been trying to get a lot of people's opinions on it just because, again, we might not agree on certain things, but it's the sentiment for John F. Kennedy. It's the most honest thing I think I've ever heard Johnson say on the phone about just JFK.
When I came in 11 months ago and I started off and I said, God help me and they would pray for me. Well, I'd just do the best I could. That's all I could promise. I've done the best I could. I met with 85 leaders in foreign nations. I faced up the problems on Cuba, Panama, Cyprus, Vietnam, and they've stayed with me and they've supported me. Now, if they won't throw me out after 11 months, they can do it. If they want to change the government, they can do it. But I picked up and tried to carry on for him as best I could. I sat there in that Security Council for 37 days and 37 meetings. And I never left the morning knowing whether I'd see my family that night or not. The coolest man at the table was Kennedy. He had eyeball to eyeball with Khrushchev, and he had confrontation, and both of them decided we couldn't destroy the world. Khrushchev pulled his message out. If anybody now to say at this late date that there's something wrong with that, or the greatest courageous acts any leader performed, I say shame on you. And we ought to have a 15-minute speech like it. That's the only thing that really makes it pay in their britches.
Now, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, have you ever heard Johnson speak like that? Because I can tell you I have a lot more phone calls where he's saying something very polite, and he never publicly ever stated anything bad about JFK. And even with Bobby, he helped Bobby win that election for the New York Senate race. That's why he was pissed later when Bobby went with Martin Luther King parading out in the street. And he's like, I can't believe that son of a bitch went out there and did that after I did this for him. Like, how dare he spit in my face, and he's getting all pissed off at RFK because RFK was on his own thing. He didn't care so much for LBJ, but he would use him if he needed to.
Well, again, I think I've heard at least some of that conversation, but and most of it until the end where he's saying that was one of the greatest acts. I don't, again, I'm prejudiced against him. Johnson's voice, it's almost like a lot of people are with Trump. He can't really say anything that sounds sincere to me. It comes off to me as totally phony, and he's being a politician. And I admit that's maybe my prejudice. I don't know. We don't know what
you want to know
really
someone
believes.
that doesn't sound sincere. It's this man right here, who I do believe was part of the conspiracy. It's Alan Dulles and RFK on 6/23/64.
I think even if that's not true, the fact that you could report that, or I mean that you found it, just if President Johnson has to take some steps later on, and these things have such an effect across the country. It's not just Mississippi, but just have an effect across the country. I mean, this is not just a local.
Why did you pick me for this?
Because I know you.
I've been a little mad at you, a little bit on this Bay of Pigs book, but I forget that very easily.
Oh, well, I'm glad. But anyway,
I don't stay angry long.
Yeah. Well, fine. But I think it could be, and I think the president feels it could be a big help.
Well, I'd do anything for the nation,
Yeah.
Any time. I've never refused. I just have a little question of my...
well, I'm sure you could do it.
Wise do.
Wait,
He wants to announce it tonight? The president wants to announce
Yeah, I think he'd like to do if it works out with Governor Johnson. Here he is.
Now, you're not wrong on Johnson using Kennedy death with the Kennedy people when he was calling them, but he wasn't the only one. Again, I'm a RFK, JFK guy, but if you want to talk about someone that used, I guess, the presidency, this is around the Walter Jenkins stuff, when Walter Jenkins incident happened, which I want to talk about too, because that's pretty funny on some certain things, just how they reacted and stuff. But this is RFK in the Lou Harris poll.
He says about New York, says Bobby Kennedy is slipping and is down to 50-50. He's destroying himself every day by invoking his brother and talking about nobody but him and taking John out to rallies and stuff like that. Mississippi, real bad.
1770.
So just don't waste any time there. Kentucky, 50, 43, and 7. Louisiana, 36, 51, and 12.
How does that compare to Alex Lewis?
It's it's exactly the same for us, but it's higher for Goldwater and lower on undecided.
Well, I think you can write Louisiana off. I was there yesterday. I think you can write most of the South off, my judgment. Next.
Florida.
That's LBJ complaining about the fact that the South, he's starting to lose votes in because of the fact that he's starting to pass Kennedy's civil rights stuff, and he's working on doing that stuff, and he's already made public speeches that he's going to keep up Kennedy's policies, which, again, small percentage of that was for the votes as well, too, because he was getting a lot of people, percentage polls saying that a lot of people were choosing him because he thought he was going to keep up Kennedy's policies. But again, it goes into the administration. I thought would have been pretty great if they would have utilized Johnson's bullying tactics and strong arming of certain individuals, because I believe for those certain things you needed that to get passed, because I believe with politics it's always like that. We blame Hoover for blackmail and all these other things, but when I looked into that, RFK gave interviews about Hoover's blackmailing things to like Jack Anderson, and he stated that Hoover would just come at him with a bunch of random claims. and just say things, and the RFK would look at it and validate if it's true or not. And then if it was something serious, he would investigate. And he did that with like the Ellen Baumgart woman that was deported by RFK. So, there's a lot of things that like, can be camelotted up to mean certain things, and I'm trying to find the balance in it. And I know you have a prejudicition against Johnson. That's fine.
I do. I do. Yeah.
Change your mind on it, but I'm here to kind of show you things that you might not have seen. Again, I wouldn't have known it if I wouldn't have branched into the Johnson side of things. But again, my show is conversational. It's random subjects, different things, and I was met with a lot of resistance on JFK when it came to people like MLK historians and other people from different things of history, which doesn't match what the Kennedy only side kind of sees. And that's because a lot of people like MLK, his vote, the Negro vote, and this is from a quote from one of those clips I just played. There is one where they talk about the polling and how Kennedy only had 55% and Johnson was at 96, in comparisons to the voting that was coming up. So, Martin Luther King was starting to lose faith in RFK a little bit. And there's a lot of things that necessarily, you have to kind of go out of the Kennedy stuff for, which I know you do. So I was just curious if, your opinions on these things, so I could try and understand, I understand that the times you were there, able to experience, working for Mark Lane and doing stuff like that. So you have a whole other thing of information that might not even be on the internet.
Yeah, well, I understand that the people like Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg had, if I remember right, when I met him, he didn't want to talk much about the assassination. He kept wanting me to listen to his big band music, which is not really I came here, but okay. Plus, he drank a lot too. He was drinking. He had little miniature liquor bottles when I picked him up, and I said, okay, that's cool.
I feel like you have to if you're looking through Kennedy documents all the time.
Yeah, you have to. But when I went in his home, the only visible evidence you came in where that he had any interest in this subject. I want to remember it right, but I think he had a big poster of Johnson that he was using like as a dartboard. I think if I remember right, something like that. And that was, how Penn Jones felt, Mark Lane, Weisberg hated each other, but I think everybody pretty much felt the same way about Johnson. He was the villain in this.
You're not wrong. Again, RFK, I had a guy, Bill Arnone, I can connect you with. He worked for RFK during his campaign, and he was there at the New York office, and he talked about how Johnson had sent RFK a life-size portrait of himself, and RFK hung it in the bathroom, so the men's bathroom. So again, there's definitely like animosity, but again, that's not Johnson being like, rubbing it in his face. It's a Southerner who Johnson was teasing. And Bobby doesn't like to be teased. And Bobby didn't accept any of you look at Johnson, for instance, he's driving in the car with a press reporter. A story comes out that Johnson's acting crazy, driving drunk and throwing beer cans out his window. You find out Johnson's on his property. We talked about this before, driving on his road, and he tosses a can out the window. But he's not like on a highway or anything like that. But the story by the press, because it's a New York reporter dealing with a guy from the South who wants to invite you to his ranch to go swim in a pool or have a barbecue or something, but you want to be in a White House office asking questions while he's at a podium. The jives and the personalities don't fit. And that's what I was bringing to with like JFK and LBJ. I think that was like a interesting mix. And I think George Reedy and others explained it best about the utilization of Johnson. And, he understood these politicians, and he wasn't going to sit and wait for one of them to do something. He was going to be like, oh yeah, do I have to tell your wife you were doing a little drinking at the party last night and you got a little bit, and then like he blackmailed Earl Warren to serve on the Warren Commission.
Right.
He brought up a little trip in Mexico City.
Well, if you, I don't know if you've read The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. That was a popular book back in the day with conspiracy theorists. And Oglesby was I think he was Tom Hayden's right-hand man at the Students for a Democratic Society, very far leftist group,
SDS,
radical group, and SDS, and
the Weatherman.
Yeah, and he was. His postulation was exactly what we're talking about here, that there were cowboys and Yankees vying for control of American society. And obviously Johnson would be from the Cowboys and Kennedy would be from the Yankees. There's something to that, at least for when you mentioned like about Kennedy not utilizing Johnson, I think that was personal preference. Again, I think he was stuck with him. They didn't expect him to take it, and he didn't know what to do with him, but he didn't. Johnson could have helped him be more successful with legislation, but he didn't like that style. Kennedy didn't like bullying and strong arming that just wasn't something he could do. And so he wasn't, I don't think he was willing to do that. Johnson may have offered, said, I can get Sam Rayburn or whoever, I can do whatever you want. And that wasn't Kennedy's game. Again, I'm looking at it through, rose-colored glasses because Kennedy's my hero and I hate Johnson. So, I
That's
admit I'm
okay.
prejudiced.
I'm going to get you at least to be mild-tempered with Johnson by the end of this damn thing.
Okay.
Now, this is how LBJ got the vice presidential spot. LBJ phone call with James Rowe. And then I'll play another one. It's called They Said a Southern Racist Did It. And it's an LBJ and Richard Russell phone call. Here it is.
Now, you want me to talk to Humphrey?
I just want you to say it. Kennedy sat down to me and said, now, is there anything that'll keep you from being loyal to me as long as I'm in that office or running part?
Uh-huh.
And that meant no campaigning against him or no disagreeing with him publicly or no urging him to do something public and then going off and growling like Chester Bowles did on Bay of Pigs.
And you wouldn't want to be Jack Garner either.
That's right. And just say that he better make up his mind now whether he's ready to go with me all the way on my platform, on my views, on my policies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm willing to always listen to him and always willing to consider what he's got to say. But when I make up my mind, I don't want to have to kiss the ass of a vice president.
That's right.
And just see if he wants to be considered under those circumstances.
Yes,
Tell him that Kennedy sat down and had a cold with me, said, now I want you to understand, I know you don't believe in a lot of this integration, this platform, but you've got to go with it whole hog or you don't want you to go.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a more reasonable aspect of how he got Johnson on board. I think it's more about the South vote, but also the way he talked to him. He kind of wasn't expecting Johnson not to take it. He was just getting his line straight with Johnson. Like, hey, if you're going to do this and it's going to get me the vote for the South, you need to be going along with me full hog, just like how Johnson was talking to James Rowe here about Humphrey. Humphrey's got to be fully on board. You can't just have somebody that's going to be going off and doing their own thing. Now, he got close with Humphrey, but at the same time, he was pissed off Humphrey wouldn't shut the hell up to the press because Humphrey just wanted to talk.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's certainly... That's Johnson's view, and again, that's to whatever that makes. That's kind of the view that you would expect him today. I don't think Johnson's going to be telling people that they didn't think I was going to take it. And I mean, man, I don't know who knows what is really accurate. I don't know, but we just know we're hearing all these things about behind the scenes and on the surface of because people have said that about a lot of. They said about Reagan and Bush, when he picked him. It's just, saying they don't seem to jibe. Why did you make that choice? Well, we have to get support from other places. Politically, you can make an excuse for it, but I don't think we'll ever really know why he was, picked. If it was really something that was thrust on him, and that somebody forced his hand. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, the question is, do you think that he was trying to get Connolly out of the car because he knew the assassination was going to happen? Because I have that documented through testimony and through everything else about what the answer was, and it was because nobody wanted to sit with Yarborough.
Yeah, that's what we've heard, because Yarborough kind of became, and to people like me, Yarborough looks like a hero because he's badmouthing the Secret Service, and he's he was kind of the. Did
you know he was the one getting sucked into the Bobby Baker investigation for $25,000? That was Walter Jenkins came out in his scandal, and did you know LBJ defended Yarborough and said Yarborough ain't that goddamn stupid to do something like that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the Bobby Baker's thing obviously was huge, and Walter Jenkins, and we can talk more about Walter Jenkins, but I mean, I don't know how much of this comes from him, but I mean, obviously he had his own issues, but strange issues, but
poor Jenkins, man. Like today he'd be like a hero, and like back then, like LBJ was trying to deny it so hard, like this is a setup, and then Deke deloached the conversation with him because Deke went to church with Jenkins and did all this other, like was at the altar with them and saw this other type of stuff, like was really close with Jenkins, and he was like, I found evidence that the cop was linked to a Republican committee, and then it was like 3 days later, Johnson calls Deke, he's like, drop it. He's like, Walter admitted to it, like it's real. It's whether he was set up or not, he's got to resign, and I have to accept it.
Well, obviously they had this kind of perversions that were there even then, so.
I know it's not. That's what I'm saying. It's not different. It's like today when stuff happens. It's like you got to remember it's just people too. But I'll play this one. Not this one. This is a different one with RFK. The Kennedy people looking down on LBJ. It's by Malcolm Kilduff's interview, and then there's one with George Reedy, but I'm not going to play that one.
Kennedy was president, Johnson was vice president. Were there any people around the White House that sort of looked down their nose at Johnson?
Oh, sure. That's always the case.
How long did it take them to change their two to the same guy?
Some of them never did.
Could you tell me who, or would you rather
No,
not?
I prefer not to.
Okay.
Some of them were so close to Kennedy that their whole life had almost been wrapped up in Kennedy.
Yeah.
And their whole political life certainly had been wrapped up in him. And you have to remember there was a pretty bitter convention fight over the nomination. And some of those old political scars had not healed. And I don't think they ever really healed. Mm-hmm. Johnson had said on the flight back that he wanted all the Kennedy staff to remain. And most of us did remain for various time periods.
And then there's the keeping the Kennedy people, Malcolm Kilduff.
How long did you stay with Johnson after he became president?
Until June of 1965.
Okay, so almost 2 years.
Yeah, a year and a half.
Yeah.
Year and a half.
Okay. In those early days, did you think you were going to stay?
Yeah, Johnson had asked me to stay, and I think I could have stayed as long as I wanted to. Although he let it be pretty well known generally that we could stay if we wanted to, but he'd really prefer to have his own people in. It was not the most comfortable. So yeah. I never had any problems with him. Some of his.
Of course, you weren't originally a Kennedy man in the same sense the others were either.
No.
Because you came later.
Yeah, and but nevertheless, some of the Johnson people you always knew you were a little suspect for some reason or another.
Mm-hmm. And again, he never kicked any of the Kennedy people out. They eventually started leaving. Sorensen was like probably the most hurt one. There's a Katharine Graham call with LBJ and was like, what the hell's wrong with Sorensen? Like, he's still not getting past the Kennedy assassination. Like, he's just too broken up. He's being lashing out at everyone for no reason. And then LBJ Sorensen says he's going to write a book and he's leaving. And LBJ got him some connections with like Edwin Weisel and others to try and get like a motion picture deal or do something where he's still going to have work, because he still wanted Sorensen to write speeches because he liked Sorensen's speeches. But again, it just becomes confusing, when it comes to like the record of the administrations and stuff like that. And obviously the Vietnam War, it's laid to bear at a lot of people's feet. I don't believe it was just necessarily one person. Like, I don't believe it was a Kennedy thing. I don't believe it was an LBJ thing. I don't believe it was this. I just believe it was a lot of bad information. I think a lot of advisors to LBJ even admitted that this should be blamed to them because they were telling Johnson to go in. Because when Johnson's begging in 67 or 66, like, what do you want me to do? Like, tell me how to get out, I'll get out. And nobody has an answer for him. He says it to RFK too, and nobody has an answer for him. So it's like, again, I think it's just a position nobody really should be in, which is, a war. But also at the same time, being the president is like a freaking insanely crazy duty. It's something you parents tell your kids so you can get good grades. And then next thing you know, someone's that, and you're like, oh, God.
Well, yeah, again, I just look at I look at it a little more black and white than you do here. Again, I think that Kennedy had seen the mistake. Kennedy came into office very, very naive. People forget he was the youngest elected president we ever had. And a lot of people, including Allen Dulles, took advantage of him. The Bay of Pigs was thrust on him as soon as he came into office, had been planned during the Eisenhower administration, and he trusted them. And so right from the very beginning, it was such a catastrophe. And then they blamed him for not providing air support because he realized this is ridiculous. I'm not going to get further involved in this. So he ended up, risking the wrath of the Cuban exiles, and all those people hated him. And then when he fired Dulles and those guys, that was a huge move. People don't realize one of the things I discovered reading Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s book, Family Values. I never knew about this, that his old Joe Kennedy, who is becoming more and more of a hero to me, Joe Kennedy Sr., that he served on a commission in the 1950s looking into the CIA. Very little information about that. RFK Jr. was the first one to talk about it, and he was the most vocal critic of the CIA in the 1950s, Joe Kennedy Sr. So Allen Dulles had to hate the Kennedys to begin with. So then his son comes into office. So, outright there was hostility right from the end that he fires him. So talking about a motive for any future conspiracy, but I think that Kennedy learned from that. He learned from the Cuban Missile Crisis. He started really doubting the Pentagon, and he started realizing that people like Curtis LeMay, Dr. Strangelove, these people are nuts, and the CIA didn't trust them. And again, I think he went a different path. And I think that that's why they killed him. You look at his American University speech, June 1963, still the greatest speech I think any president has ever given, maybe any American politician. And it's so unlike anything we've had before or since. And I think when the national security state heard that speech, I think that signed his death warrant. So I think he was going in a different path. I think things would have been completely different. I tell people, if his assassination hadn't happened, it's impossible to know what the 1960s would have been like. They wouldn't have been the 60s. I don't know if you would have had a counterculture movement at all, because you wouldn't have had an anti-war movement because he was getting out. You might not have had a drug. I don't know if you would have had drugs or not. I don't know if any of that counterculture, what would they have been rebelling against? RFK wouldn't have been assassinated. MLK wouldn't have. You wouldn't have had the other assassinations. So I think it's that's why you have to look so much at why he was assassinated, because I think all that kind of spiraled from that, and then further research. I mean, I'm one of the few people that I think Ted Kennedy wasn't in the car, Chappaquiddick. I think that was his political assassination, and I believe John F. Kennedy Jr. was murdered. I've done a lot of research on that. So none of those things would have happened, I don't think, and I don't think you'd be seeing the hostility towards RFK Jr. now by a lot of the public, because it's a Kennedy. People have grown because there've been so many books and so much kind of revisionist history. Seymour Hersh and all these other people, that the Dark Side of Camelot, that Jim DiEugenio talks about that. He and I are on the same page with this, that people have a tendency now to want to look at the Kennedys critically, which is fine to examine them honestly. But I think, again, if you look at JFK's record especially, I think it just really shines in comparison to others. And LBJ, again, I admit it's prejudice. Maybe it's just his voice I can't get past, because I can't. I listen to him talk, and I mean, he could give a speech honoring Don Jeffries, and I probably would, have a hard time taking it. So he just, something about his voice. I don't know what it is.
Did Ted Kennedy get sucked into alcohol after JFK's death?
I think so. I don't think there's any evidence. I mean, he was a fun-loving guy.
A lot of people mention, like, modern day politicians will mention, like, if they're using a joke, or like Bill Maher mentions, like, you got as much of a drunk as Ted Kennedy was. Like, and Johnson also states it in a phone call where he's trying to empathize with RFK's pain of Walter Jenkins' incident, because, Walter Jenkins had been around before Johnson was president, and dealing with, like, why Bobby was so silent and steadfast on, like, to get a short answer, which he thought was the smartest way, because he was picking up RFK at the time he found out about Jenkins' incident, and that was RFK's response was like, no, I just think he has to resign. Like, you just got to get this. Walter Jenkins had some secrets, because there's campaign donations. And I actually wanted to get into this with you a little bit, because I wanted to talk about the Joe Sr., because I had mentioned it about like the bootlegging and stuff like that. I don't know how much it was, whether he worked at a business and it was mafia people go to all these businesses and they just happened to cross paths and money was passed over. Johnson states it. He clears out, basically names every single person. Everybody accepts campaign contributions. It's not like it's a little known thing, or it's just one person doing it. And he complains about it when it's brought up with the Baker stuff. Nixon complains about it when it's brought up later with like Howard Hughes or Watergate or other issues that were going on. He mentions the Kennedys. Where do you think, do you think it was mafia related with the campaign contributions? Do you think it was, something with the dad? Because this always relates to like why RFK was so on attack against organized crime. Did he have resentment?
I don't think he had. I think he was a zealous guy, and I think he honestly felt that. But the more I study old Joe Kennedy, I was very influenced by RFK Jr. His book Family Values paints a positive picture of his grandfather. I've always thought Joe Kennedy Sr. was treated unfairly by historians. This guy was an anti-war activist going back to World War I. He was part of the America First movement, World War II. JFK came to make that peace speech mostly influenced by his father. And his father was one of the first critics of the Federal Reserve. He was doing a lot of things I thought were good back then and making a lot of the right enemies. And as RFK Jr. said, and I said it, I think before he said it, is that all of these stories about him being a bootlegger, all the mafia things, the 1960 election with Mayor Daley and all that stuff, It all comes from CIA or mafia sources, every one of those allegations.
But all the
So
Johnson stuff comes from authors.
the Johnson, well, I don't know which Johnson stuff you're referring to. I mean, in terms of some of it is
Any of the
personal.
stuff with the JFK animosity or articles that are being written.
Yeah, it does. It comes from, but it's not, they're not people that are affiliated just with the CIA and the mafia. I mean, the CIA and the mafia both hated the Kennedys with a passion, and a lot of that came because of RFK, because RFK did.
Most of these
I don't know
authors
why he
hate
felt.
LBJ with a passion. I'm just drawing the connection. Like if you're gonna call one a farce, you gotta call the other one a farce, bro.
Well, I don't know how many LBJ has. He gets much better press than JFK now. There are no
Oh
movies
my
attacking.
God! Wait,
Oh,
now or back
I
then?
think he does. Yeah. No, not back then. I think he does. I think he does
I'm
now.
about to say now it's just a hipster cultural thing to make it pop trendy of the affairs JFK had, but
Yeah.
LBJ back then was slandered as crap to the press. He was always
Oh,
trying to
yes.
increase his press numbers. He had like 4 different press secretaries trying to do work for him. That's why
No, he
Malcolm
wasn't.
Kilduff didn't stay in it.
But that was during the Camelot period. Again, where Jackie Kennedy created. Kennedy was a martyr for about 10 years, a little more than that. And then you had Judith Campbell Exeter that came out. And Jim DiEugenio's, people can read the posthumous assassination of John F. Kennedy, which he wrote years ago. And I had come to those same conclusions independently. Judith Campbell Exeter was completely uncredible, and the press accepted her right away, unquestionably. And the attitude towards Kennedy just completely flip flopped. Gone were all those Camelot type books. Everything became the bad Kennedy boys, and the Seymour Hersh. Now you've got this what's her name, Maureen Callahan, I think she is. She's becoming big. She's got a huge podcast now. I wrote about her in American Memory Hole. She absolutely hates the Kennedys. She trashes RFK Jr. All just makes up stuff that
Everybody
that he
trashes
raped.
RFK Jr. It's not even fair, but
Well, it isn't, but I mean, she just says, like, accuse them of rape, and it's just nonsense. There's no evidence at all for that. But there's a lot of people out there that hate the Kennedys now. I'm one, really, me and Jim DiEugenio to a lesser degree. We're kind of outliers at this point. You're not many people that still have kind of a
I would
rose-colored view of the
resist
Kennedys.
that a little bit. I mean, maybe RFK Jr. has a bad kind of reputation going up. I'm fair with RFK Jr. I didn't like the whole backing down of a lot of things he stated before. I watched that congressional testimony he gave, but also his boss is watching. His boss is waiting for him to say something that he's not going to agree with. So then he loses his job, and then he's not going to be able to accomplish all the things he wants to do. Sometimes you got to play ball. That's all they want to see is you play ball. That's the whole point of like the main moral of this podcast here is playing ball here. But again, it's also the misconceptions. Like, I mean, Kennedy had a lot of great achievements. I thought he would have been great for this country. I thought RFK would have been amazing for this country. Just the balanced view aspect of things. Like we can't, like when you start pinning all the blame on devilish characters like Hoover and all this type of stuff, we got to stick to like what is more solid based. And in my belief, I think that's like CIA stuff. And that's other things with grand operational things, like if it was a planned thing or it was a multi-failure. Johnson criticized the Secret Service in the Warren Commission report. That is well established. He honestly thought later on that it was a Cuba thing, like it was some type of Cuban conspiracy. So again, he's not paying attention to the work that's being done. He's just doing what the public's going to want to demand and trying to avoid the backlash that would come if he didn't do it. Like even with RFK's resignation, George Reed's like, you need to have a photo in the White House of RFK resigning. He's like, why do I need to do that? He's not happy with me. I don't want to take a picture with him if it's just going to blow up in my face later. George Reed's like, there's more backlash from it later if you don't have a photo than if you get one now and you do have a photo. And it's like, yeah, again, it's all this like him is just avoiding major other scandals and trying to leave himself a bit of a legacy. The Great Society was torn down, his idea of it. But again, when we talk about who met with MLK, LBJ did, who actually, accomplished a lot of things with civil rights and did a lot of things. LBJ, it wasn't just Kennedy's aspect of things. He also kind of believed in it as well, too. Because again, JFK and LBJ weren't necessarily opposite individuals. I'm sure they had some things in common. I mean, based on a lot of phone calls and a lot of interviews with other people, besides certain individuals that barely talk to LBJ, like Evelyn Lincoln and others, they're pretty positive on LBJ and the relationship he had either with JFK. The only one that's always been negative has been RFK. And I think that's because RFK didn't actually spend a lot of time with LBJ. It was a lot of like quick phone calls and things like that. And I think, that was because of maybe the clashing of personalities, but he took time to get to know him. LBJ didn't also invite him to the ranch. That's kind of a key for LBJ's friendship level if you get to go swimming with him.
Yeah, no, and there's, but I mean, it's not just, like Philip Nelson. I think you've read his books. He was a friend of mine. He's passed away, I guess, a couple of years ago now. But he wrote some, I think, very thoroughly documented books of LBJ. And I don't know if he thought, I guess he might have thought LBJ was the architect too. I'm not sure. Roger Stone did too, but Roger Stone's work wasn't as extensive as Philip Nelson's. I don't know what you think of his work. Again, I I agree. It looks like we're, assigning good and bad, but again, I'm a Kennedy fanboy. I admit that, but again, that's because it had a huge impact on me as a very little kid, and it's never
I am
left
too.
me.
I'm a Kennedy
Yeah,
fanboy.
yeah. That's so it's so it's and LBJ again. He was the first villain I knew. I'm 7 years old. That my memories kind of begin. I mean, I had memories before that, but my timeline begins with the JFK assassination. That's when I start remembering everything from that day forward because it had such a huge impact on me on TV on all the time, hearing my dad and the other relatives, speculate what was happening, and I soaked all that in. And I was already, we were Catholics. He was the first Catholic president, so they all loved him because of that. So that was a huge impact on me. And so I became immersed in this Kennedy stuff. And it never, really fully left me. And at the same time, LBJ was the villain to them. I didn't hear them, they didn't know about the CIA or anything like that. Johnson did it, So I admit that. And to me, I can't let go of that prejudice completely. But yeah, there's things way bigger than Johnson. If Johnson had just decided, I'm going to kill Kennedy, or think he could kill Kennedy and take over, that wouldn't have worked because you had to have more powerful people on board, and the press might have actually done its job then. I think the press was told not to do their job by obviously much more powerful forces because we know they didn't do anything. They never attempted to investigate. We know NBC News, for instance, signed an agreement the day after the assassination not to broadcast anything that was deviated from the FBI's version, which is just really shameful that a television network did that. But that shows you what kind of a
Compartmentalize the conspiracy to understanding that like agencies and kind of like the groupthink, the domino theory, and all these people believing in these things at the times led to obviously quick conclusions. You mentioned the secondary commission of the Warren Commission. I can play the clip of it, but it's Burt Griffin. Even though, despite what he says now about the Kennedy assassination not being a conspiracy, he is on tape for the HSCA stating that the Warren Commission sacrificed speed for elections. It was all about getting this out before the elections. It was all about getting this done and doing these certain things. And he mentioned that there were things that were not fully investigated. I don't think anybody can explain why Jack Ruby's apartment was so close to where Tippett's murder was, and certain things like that. Questions were asked to Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford didn't give an answer to. There's a lot of things that were left obviously open. So, understanding media, Operation Mockingbird, where media organizations were working with the government to kind of keep things concealed or these types of things. Witnesses weren't examined. People weren't given space when they should have been given space, or they were silenced. That's real conspiracy. That's real problems with trying to get the truth of something, which is not what people, I think, now view their media as not being truthful, but back then viewed them as being truthful. And giving them the answers that they need. And if it wasn't on the media networks like Life Magazine or any of these, then it probably wasn't real. So, it wasn't until Geraldo Rivera exploded everybody's head when he showed an exploding head on his show. That's something that shocked a lot of people, Grodin putting that on there. So I think, what you mentioned, you're right along the lines of like, yeah, the government, it's not really different today. I think it just shows when the turning point was, when we really get to see the true cloak of where our government and all these other types of problems where people have issues with certain media sources and stuff really get shown is with the Kennedy assassination.
No, I mean, a lot of this, the alt media, a lot of its power comes from what began with the JFK assassination. So, now that the conspiracy theorist term kind of comes from that, April 1st, 1967 memo from the CIA of countering criticism of the Warren Report, people like Mark Lane. And so now everybody's a conspiracy theorist that questions everything. But yeah, that's I called it the mother of all conspiracies. in my book, Hidden History, and I think it is, especially for anybody alive today, because that's kind of it's even for people who weren't born then, it's near enough on the timeline for people to be able to relate to it. And there's somebody like RFK Jr. still in the picture. He's got a connection there. The picture of him in the White House with his uncle. So I mean, I think it's very important. But I mean, I can't. Again, I don't know. I'm not. I don't have any theory or anything like that. People always ask me who killed the president, and so who killed JFK. I know that what they said happened couldn't have happened. They lied about it. So you have to figure out why they took so much time and are still taking so much time to try to make this impossible fairy tale fit. Whoever did it, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. And so why do they keep telling you that it was him? And why are all these people doing it? That's why I think it has to be a huge conspiracy, because why else would you have people at ABC 60 some years after anybody that was at ABC then? Why would they still feel compelled to prop up this impossible theory? Why are they contacting somebody like Todd Vaughn, who's a nobody, that posts it for him? He hasn't done it anywhere near as much as I have. Why are they? Because they're searching so much for somebody that will prop up this ridiculous single bullet theory and the ridiculous lone assassin theory. It ought to tell you how big it was. So yeah, it's much bigger than LBJ. Definitely. There's no question about it. But I just think, from my standpoint, I think LBJ, looking at it now, retrospect, I think the most important contribution he has to the conspiracy lore is that his behavior, whether it was warranted or not, whether we were just prejudiced like me against his voice, his behavior contributed to that skepticism. I think a lot of the public just went along, wow, that guy's the guy that took over. He seems suspicious. And I think that's a big part of it.
What do you think about LBJ's viewpoint as in this perspective you have now, not just on the Kennedy assassination, but just as a president in general? A lot of people bring relations to Trump when they talk about LBJ, or if they don't like LBJ. You get a whole slew of comments, calling him a racist, calling him starting the Vietnam War, calling him mass murderer, or all this type of stuff. Honestly, none of those claims, and I could bat them down, I don't think they're accurate. A lot of people keep mentioning he said the N-word on a tape about certain things. If someone could show me that tape or that link, please send it over, because I challenge you on trying to find it, because I've tried. But he said Negro, but that's the language for the time period, and I could show you plenty of people that stated that. Kennedy said that at a point as well too. So I'm curious, when we get into these claims of racism and all this other type of stuff, everyone gets mad at progressive people for making these claims on certain individuals, or other people making claims calling them like RFK Jr. a rapist or something. It's no different. If you grew up in the time period, you read a book about LBJ or whatever that time period of when the assassination happened, you're older now, and I ask you, you're probably going to say LBJ, because that's an influencing factor. But when we talk about the real things, like the actual evidence for some of these things, I had someone comment that LBJ was a Republican. He never once ran as a Republican, and he despised Republicans. He's our version today of what an old school Democrat is. So you get into these aspects of things where we got to find and not lose the actual part of who these people are. And, I'm not trying to, like I said, not trying to change your mind, understand your bias, but has your perspective changed at all? Even if it's the stuff I showed you, or just as an adult now, looking at the perspective LBJ had, and he did have accomplishments. He did do things. You don't have to like his voice. Let's keep him silent. But you got to examine, like I've had Abe Peck, who, worked for the counterculture magazine, The Seed. As a young kid, he's rebelling against the government and all this crap. And then now he's older and he's like, yeah, I was a kid. I have a different perspective now. We did act a little bit too rash, and talked about the hippie movement and the writing for the Free Press and the Chicago Magazine and everything like that. He had a different view as he aged, I think, as most people do.
Well, in terms of OBJ, I have a prejudice against pretty much, other than the Kennedys, like I said, I know where that came from originally, because it had such a huge impact on me. But I tend to, if you read my work, or people that read my work know that I don't like any of them really. For a long time, I was a Trump agnostic. I don't think I am at this point. I'm pretty fed up with him. But other than that, I don't like any of them. I think that they're all horrible people. And so LBJ just, he was horrible, but a lot of it was because he had a really objectionable personality. And, I remember the pictures of him. I'm a dog owner, I think you are too, where he's holding up the hound dogs by their ears for the photographers. And
They
he
weren't
just
off the
did.
ground. He complained about
Oh,
that to the phone
it,
calls. He was like, "Why do they got to do that? I love." He had a beagle parade. Why the hell would he do
right.
that if he didn't love
It
dogs?
just, it just looked like it looked, and it fed in with the image that we were hearing about behind the scenes, that he
What
was a
happens if he's
bully.
rubbing his dog's belly and he's got it in his lap and he's leaning back in the chair howling
Well,
with his
yeah,
doggy?
he might do that too, I'm sure. But I'm just saying he did things that weren't, a lot of things that weren't a good look. Like I said, whatever he meant the day of the assassination, he looked insincere as hell. And and that's the way everybody felt. Even the Kennedy people that didn't go with him, that was the main reason. They were turned off by his behavior and said that, and it had a huge impact on me reading that book, Johnny. They weren't trying to convey that, I don't think. But that's what I got at. Wow, man, damn, he was really acting suspicious as hell. Now that's again, they were there, so that was their impression. So I just think, it's not like I'm never gonna like him, but that's no different than really any president since JFK. I mean, maybe Jimmy Carter had a slightly less negative view of than some of the others, but I don't like any of them.
I'm
So
with
it's
you on
not
that.
like I'm picking on Johnson, but he was, JFK's vice president, so he kind of comes in, when you're discussing all this.
No, bringing up LBJ doesn't immediately mean I'm a offender of the Kennedy administration. I appreciate the Kennedy administration more than I do the Johnson one. I'm just having, again, you're ingrained from the Kennedy stuff to believe Johnson is evil, 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 evil. And then you look into the LBJ stuff and you're not necessarily realizing, I guess, or you are realizing that it's not what people kind of made it out to be from the Kennedy stuff, at least from my
Good you're
perspective.
questioning it. It's good you're
And
questioning it. We also could question, yeah.
what about your views on RFK? Because again, I would have thought RFK would have been a great president, great for this country. My grandma loved RFK. Like the whole thing starts for me with the Kennedy and the RFK stuff, and then you learn about the wiretapping and kind of like the mixed behavior and the aggression and all that type of stuff. And maybe it was fueled in the wrong places based on certain aspects and certain perspectives. But has that ever changed your perspective with RFK, the senior?
Well, I question why he chose to do what he did to defend the Warren Commission in public. Uh, that's what he chose to do. I don't know why Teddy Kennedy did either, because I don't think he believed it either later. But uh, and he was responsible. And what I have done researching the Kennedy family in general, I'm way more down on them than I used to be. I said I still have warm feelings for RFK Jr. I don't want anything to do with any of the rest of them. I think they're horrible people now at this point. But and a lot of it, RFK Jr. is amazing. He turned out as well as he did because Ethel Kennedy was a real piece of work. Reading about her was just awful. And RFK married her. So, and she just was just really just read some of the things she did. She was a horrible mother. She just was just a really horrible person. Treated everybody terribly, treated the staff terribly, and kept a really ugly house. The dogs crapping inside. Just ridiculous stuff that somebody with her money shouldn't have been doing. So RFK Jr., is a reason why he became a drug addict after his father died. He was living in this kind of atmosphere. And Carolyn Kennedy, I've really got a very negative impression of her now. So it's not, I don't love all the Kennedys. I still have a fondness for RFK because I think he would have done good things as the president. Well, we don't know. We don't know. But I think that's why he was killed, I guess, because somebody thought he would. But Ted Kennedy, certainly, I think he was set up at Chappaquiddick, but I had nothing. I think he had kind of a gutless political career, and his conduct was shameful. When JFK Jr. Was murdered, I think he was one of the he waddled out to the thing and orchestrated a lot of the stuff, and he was definitely in on it. So it's not all Kennedys that I worship, but JFK I still do. So it's hard to look at these things, and it's hard to like. If I admire you for looking at LBJ in a different light. You're a bigger man than me. I don't think I can do that.
I won't stop at obviously one perspective on it. I've talked to Hoover biographers. I don't necessarily agree with everything like that, but I think you got to examine it through how they might have examined it at the time. Like Hoover's a Boy Scout, and honestly, my theory is he's autistic, mostly because he's like a Rain Man. He's got one task. If anybody's in his way on that task, you're an enemy. But he was buddy with RFK, so it wasn't like it was a hostile blackmailing relationship. It was more like on an aspect of like Hoover was just trying, this is going to be bad for the country. Does the president know about this? This is going to be bad for the country. Does the president know about this? 2-minute conversations besides the Warren Commission stuff in the beginning. Those are the longest phone calls. But the other stuff was just mostly simple. Here's the task. All right, I'll get that done. He says it in like 6 different ways where I'm like, this is something off about the way this guy talks. That makes me think he might have been a pool baby, a chlorine baby, whatever you want to say. Somebody drank something with him. But there's something that's a little bit, like Boy Scoutish. So I think, examining these figures and looking at them, again, it's psychoanalyzing. It's difficult to do. But again, I'm just trying to have a balanced perspective on the whole thing, which, I've always respected your perspective on things. We've talked about subjects that a lot of people steer away from, which is why I like talking to you, because you do research those heavy topics, whether it's the minutia with the umbrella woman or umbrella guy, umbrella man, polka dot dress woman, or MK Ultra and other aspects that go into things that I feel like a lot of people shouldn't really gloss over. They should still look at, but just because it's too conspiracy, they don't want to talk about it. And I've always appreciated your books and your works, Don.
I appreciate it.
You've done great work, and you've helped me out with getting some people on my show as well too. Pipe to Bimbo and Red was a good book. Read that with your co-author William Law. And I enjoy talking to him as well. And I want to give you the moment to be able to share your links and where people can find your show and everything like that, because I don't want to take up too much of your time with my LBJ stuff that you're just not going to want to come on, change your opinion on it.
Because I got to run a minute now. But no, I the only place that I'm not being shadow banned, I am shadow banned, is on Substack. That's the place I'm being allowed to grow a little bit. It's DonaldJeffries.substack.com. I protest. That's the name of my podcast as well. It's every Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, my guest will be Chuck O'Celli, he's a JFK guy. I'm sure you've heard of. He used to produce my show a long time ago. I haven't talked to him in a while, so we'll see what he has to say. But the people, we talk about lots of things other than We're going to talk about JFK that much, actually, on there, because it's, I don't know how much. I've kind of said all I could about it. Although I still love talking about it. But so people can find me there. But Substack is the best way to support me, DonaldJeffries.substack.com.
And Don, I'm going to say thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. And stay tuned for our next episode.